Thank you, Steve. Good afternoon or good morning to everyone, and thank you again for sharing your time today. And for this session, we will be talking about the integration of environmental and social safeguards on the activities supported by GCF, and particularly on the REDD Plus results-based payment. My name is Leo Paat. I'm the Senior Environment and Social Specialist of the Green Climate Fund, and with me is Moon Herrick, and we're both assisting the implementation of the REDD Plus results-based payment, as well as the environmental and social management system of GCF. The aim of this session is to provide an overview of the safeguards framework of GCF, particularly relating to the REDD Plus RBP and the request for proposal recently approved by the board. In this session, we will be discussing the overall safeguards requirement and approach for activities funded by GCF, as well as the safeguards requirement related to the results-based payment. We have structured our discussion in this manner.
Part one, we will do an overview of the Green Climate Fund environmental and social safeguards, including the environmental and social safeguards and due diligence roles, risk-based approach as well. Part two will cover the environmental and social safeguards for GCF results-based payments pilot program. It will cover briefly the program itself in broad strokes, followed by a summary of the safeguards requirements for the pilot program and the particular temporal nature of this safeguards application. Then we'll review, looking at the past actions as well as future actions and the role of the accredited entities in administering this program.
So let's start. GCF embeds environmental and social sustainability in its operation and decision making. And this is provided under the governing instrument as well as the policies of GCF. The GCF incorporates environmental and social considerations in ways that not only include measures of doing no harm, but also opportunities for doing good. And in this manner, also improving the environmental and social outcomes. The GCF does so through its Environmental and Social Management System, or the ESMS. The ESMS is a framework for achieving environmental and social improvements while addressing potential adverse impacts of projects in a systematic, coherent, and transparent manner. The ESMS is underpinned by the GCF's own environmental and social policy. This policy, recently adopted by the board, articulates the principles, roles, and expectations around due diligence and environmental and social risk management across all the activities of GCF. The environmental and social policy of GCF requires the conduct of an environmental and social due diligence throughout the life cycle of the project. The roles and responsibilities for due diligence is outlined in the environmental and social policy. But to put it simply, the accredited entity has the primary responsibility for identifying, assessing all the potential environmental and social risks and impacts, proposing mitigation measures, and based on the identified risks and impacts, assign and propose risk categories of projects, and also undertake stakeholder engagement, including grievance redress mechanism, and as well as monitoring and reporting. The countries, on the other hand, confirms the consistency of safeguards measures with the country requirements and the ESS standards. The GCF confirms the overall due diligence and risk category proposed by the accredited entity, reviews the stakeholder engagement, as well as the monitoring and reporting. This due diligence process is underpinned by an environmental and social safeguards, or we call it the ESS, of the GCF. The ESS are a set of standards specifying the requirements and rules for identifying, assessing, and mitigating risk and impacts of projects. In 2014, the board adopted the IFC's performance standard as the interim safeguard standards of GCF, and which covers key environmental and social issues, including requirements for stakeholder engagement and grievance redress. Projects are categorized according to the level of potential risk and impact. The extent, the depth, and breadth of due diligence are informed by the risks and impacts, such that projects that may have higher environmental and social risk require more rigorous due diligence. Due diligence is exercised by the accredited entities using various tools, such as impact assessment and management plans. The GCF also undertakes its own due diligence, and the aim of which is to understand how the risks and impacts were assessed and planned to be mitigated by the accredited entities. The due diligence of GCF confirms the consistency of assessments and the proposed mitigation measure requirements of the standards as well as the relevant policies of GCF.
Part 2, the environmental and social safeguards for the GCF's results-based payments pilot program. And I'm Moon Herrick. I'm the REDD Plus consultant at the firm, and at the GCF, and I will be explaining to you how the safeguards apply to the pilot program. So as most of you know, last October, the GCF board approved a pilot program for results-based payments for REDD Plus, which will be open for 5 years, starting in the end of 2017 and ending in 2022. The pilot has an envelope of 500 million US dollars and a $5 price per ton of CO2 equivalent. The pilot's eligibility period is from the 31st of December 2013, when the Warsaw Framework was adopted, to the 31st of December 2018, and funding proposals can only be submitted by accredited entities. The reason for this will be clear as we go on. To apply, there are 2 steps. First, submit a concept note, which is used to assess whether the results will be eligible for the pilot program. This essentially is just checking whether the 4 Warsaw Framework pillars were in place when the results were produced. If eligible, countries will be invited to have an accredited entity submit a full funding proposal. So here's a summary of the safeguards requirements for the pilot program. The interesting thing to note here is that there are essentially 2 temporal directions to be considered and 2 safeguards involved, plus the GCF's policies, which must be complied with. At the first stage, we simply assess whether the systems are in place to capture the necessary information. This will involve information disclosure regarding both the Cancun safeguards and the GCF's environmental and social safeguards, as described by my colleague Leo. When a full funding proposal is submitted, we will look at the information related to these activities that produce the emissions reduction results and assess whether they are sufficient. Next, we will assess the use of proceeds. This is the forward-looking part of results-based payments. Annual reporting will be required on the use of results-based payments, also known as proceeds. And a grievance mechanism will be part of the system that will have to be in place in order to ensure that the proceeds are used in a way that complies with the GCF's environmental and social safeguards. Lastly, non-carbon benefits are not required as part of the funding proposals, but they are welcomed and may be assessed against the scorecard in a way that could enhance the performance of the proposals against the scorecard. As mentioned, there are 2 temporal aspects to consider regarding results-based payments in the pilot program. Those applied to actions taken in the past to produce results, and those applied to activities funded by the results-based payments issued by the GCF. As you can see, in addition to compliance with the Cancun safeguards, accredited entities will also have to assure that these actions were not in conflict with the GCF's environmental and social safeguards, gender policy, or its interim policy on prohibited practices. For the use of proceeds, safeguards are treated like any other GCF investment, which is by nature ex ante or forward-looking. Accredited entities must annually report on the way GCF results-based payments were used to ensure that the funding activities comply with the GCF's environmental and social safeguards, gender and prohibited practices policies, as well as its Indigenous peoples policies and monitoring and accountability framework. So to review, for past actions, accredited entities will need to attest that countries complied with both Cancun safeguards and the GCF environmental and social safeguards. And in the future, they'll need to report on an annual basis on the use of proceeds, illustrating that it complies with the GCF policies listed here. As you can see, accredited entities have a special role to play in illustrating compliance with the safeguards for the GCF Results-Based Payments pilot program. This arrangement reflects the GCF's business model and the high value and trust that we place in them as our partners on the ground. Thank you.
And for more information on the GCF's ESS standards as well as policies, we have at our GCF website our own safeguards page. You can visit the site and then you can download all the policies as well as guidance documents.
Thank you very much, and we hope you have a great day.
Thank you.